I've known Sokwu for a long time, primarily through Law of the Sea Institute meetings and other related ocean law and policy meetings in particularly in Korea. He's an old friend and collaborator. He's a professor of international law, of course, at Inha University in Korea. And I will let his bio note do the speaking. Otherwise, he's a fine friend, a great intellectual colleague to work with. And I'd now like to present the roaming Sokwu to cross to the microphone and provide his presentation in. I'm not even going to worry about giving him a 15-minute warning, because he's his own master in these things, and will continue talking regardless of what I say as chair. Sokwu, please.
I'm waiting my PowerPoint. Good morning again. It is quite the while, due to the pandemic, we get together here, and is in particular, this is a personally great privilege and the pleasure to be here to have a meeting with you. And the topics I choose is that based on the Law of the Institutes, the annual conference in particular sponsored, or the working with the Korean counterparts. I myself participating about all the 15 the conferences I organize or I participate. So I based on that, the experience I have is that I want to talk to you that what we experienced and what kinds of things we discuss in the scene. And if you have a chance to go to the homepage of the LOSI Institute, you may find that the different the event or different conference the LOSI Institute the organizing. For example, some of the topics with the RT or the Coast Guard, that is the different level or different events they're organizing and that they're doing. But in particular, my presentation today is specifically working on that the 15 the events I participate, and hoping that at the end of my presentation, I would like to put some of the questions I have is that as a platform, the how the Law of this Institute moving forwards in with the cooperation with the colleagues, let's say family or the communities, neighbors they have in this saga. If you have a chance to find time, there is the books to display the outside of this this room. And the one of the books I mentioned here, the Ocean Debate, two piece of papers I should encourage for you to take time to read. The one is the Harris work of the old days of the Law of the Institute back in 1960s. At the time, as you know, the Law of the Institute placed at the University of Rhode Island, and the second paper is written by the Sherry, and the years I think one of the heydays they enjoy because over the 20 years the LOSI in Hawaii is produced the quite remarkable achievements, and you have some details of the achievements of the LOSI in Hawaii. And if you have a chance to back to the first article, the Harry wrote something about the years of the LOSI Institutes in Berkeley. I involved myself is that as I mentioned, the 15 times, starting from the 2006, as Clive mentioned that, the time the in-house university which I the work. This year is 20 years my teaching career, and the starting from the 2003. And if I talking about my teaching career, it is quite difficult to not to say about my relations with these LOSI institutes, because I working this one the year 2006. If you are the familiar, so this is a list of the conferences, the theme and the venue. I'm going to touch upon the one by one, and because that is very important for us to think. This is the first conference I organized. The Clive was there, and the David was there. At the time, think about why these things happen, why these things for me to be involved is very much important. Yesterday, I briefly talked about my first phone call with Harry, a very convenient time for him at the 3 a.m. his whole time. And but that is how these things turn out. 2006 is the most difficult time for Korea with the neighboring states. We have some issues. You may know that we have some island disputes with Japan. And Japan tried to, in April of the 2006, Japan tried to conduct the hydrographic survey of that island area, and that Korea did consider that activities as marine scientific research. As you know, that the line between the hydrographic survey and also the MSR is quite blurring. And so that the question to us is that how the Korea are dealing with this issue, because based on the current domestic law of the marine scientific research, any states who conduct the marine scientific research in Korean domain have to get the prior consent from the Korean government. So there are harsh debate between two sides, and almost that event get to the military conflicts in the certain level of the conflict and skirmishes between two sides. Luckily, that issues is solved by the diplomatic negotiations, and then that issue came to us that the settlements or the certain articles or certain issues of the UNCLOS should be researched more careful than before. And then the issues, the Ministry of the Ocean and Fisheries contact the late Judge Chun Park, and Chun Park advised that we should hold that the international conference, invite the specialists on the LOSI to Korea. And Judge Chun Park, based on Judge Chun Park's advice, the ministry called the President Hong Seung-yong of my university. The President Hong is a long time the ocean, the policy, the researcher at the CODI. It's a previous name of the KIOST, and served as a vice minister of the ministry and became the president of my university. So that I was invited because I'm the only one to teaching international at INA at the time. And although my special area is not the LOSI at the time, it's more close to territorial sovereignty or the treaty interpretation application. But I was invited because Judge Chun Park is my teacher, and President Hong is my boss, and they invited me for the dinner. Asked me, the job done. They're not polite, if I remember correctly. The meeting is not the pleasant. Indeed, they talked without me, and they asked me what I have to do. And the first assignment for me is that contact the Harry Scheiber of the LOSI Institute, and the first contact is a very convenient, the talk I had with him. So that is the beginning of this event. And traditional, quite customary, the format was decided at the time. We invite 5 judges of the tribunal, and the many colleagues, the overseas participate. If I recall correctly, right now we have many ocean conference in Korea, organized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and also the KMI And but this one is quite unique in terms of the size and in terms of the format, because almost a 3 days conference focusing on the every aspect of the law of the sea. And there's a good things that we invite at the time from the beginning, the couple of students or the junior early career, the junior colleagues, and that those are right now they became a very active the academics or practitioner in the scene. Outcome was very good, so that the evaluation was very positive, so that the government did decide to hold the meeting again, and so we have a meeting again in Seoul, as a different topic we choose, and then the conference in 2A, we come to the Berkeley and hold the conference here. At the time, the Professor Scheiber in the college, David Caron, and all members of the UC Berkeley related to the ocean area to participate. And the many participants from the U.S. continent, they share the scene together. And the 2009, we hold the conference in Hawaii. It's I may recall that this is one of the best conference among the 15 conference, and not only in terms of size, but the format of the program is so great. It was almost 4 days conference. Many people want to come to that meeting, not only for the conference, but I think the location of the places of the venue is very attractive for the people, and that. Among the panels, why I say that this is one of the best conference from my own collection is that one of the panels is assigned to very sensitive issues at the time, which is the impeccable incident of the happened March of the 2009. And we have a speaker from the Chinese side, but that the person is belonging to the government. A very strong view. He showed that what is Chinese understanding of that incident, and also we have two speakers from the one from the U.S. Coast Guard and the one from the U.S. Navy, and so that the dialogues of the panel it give the outsiders a very clear view and what is the salient issues involved. Hawaii has a strong connection with the Asia Pacific. So many participants from that area, which give us the more broad the understanding of the issue. And then to 2010, we hold the meeting at the very venue of the tribunal. This is quite a remarkable the conference in many sense, because we hold that academic session for the first time at the very venue of the courtroom of the tribunal, and our local host in Germany. They adopt the traditional way of the law of the institute back in 1960s, 70s, which is that they open to public in forms of the registration. So many participants in European countries signed the registration and pay the registration fee and participate that the conference. And this is also quite unique, because from this time, a lot of the institutes they expand their the partnership, because at the time the fund from the Korea is getting smaller, because if there is no issues on ocean, it's quite difficult to get the fund. It's quite irony. If there is many things happening in the ocean, quite easy to collect the money, but if everything settles down. The government don't need to hold at the meeting. So as so that we have some difficulties to secure the enough fund, so that there are outside the funds is to come. And one of the significant contributions at the time is the Academia Sinica of the Taiwan, and also OPRF of the Nippon Foundation of the Japan. So that which means that the theme of the law of the sea at the time is the geographical location moved to the Asia, in particular Northeast Asia, because not only China, Taiwan, and Japan, but also Korea is very keen to working in that subject, in particular, the dispute settlement system. And then we hold a conference down under as University of Wollongong with the ANCOS, and the clubs act as a local host. It's a good event in many sense, as I mentioned that Australia has a strong voice with the Pacific Island and Pacific Ocean. So we have many new members in our the LOSI the community. But I have to say that this event very this is very sad. Sorry to share it, what happened. Our dear colleagues, John Van Dyke was passed away during the conference. We lost the dear colleagues, not only dear colleagues, but one of the important figure in our the LOSI events. And after that, we hold that the conference, the memorizing the John's work to 2013, which largely supported also from the KIOST. And then the Cherry took to make a JVD Institute. And I am very happy to report that that annual event is also quite well, so that we will hold that the 8th meeting this year. Actually, at the end of this month, one of the island in the French Polynesia. The Hawaii has a long traditions, working on that the many issues of the, in particular, protection, preservation, marine environments, and the climate change, and the theme topics the Sherry will choose is very keen to share, so that maybe in someday, of the Institute and also JVD work together to hold the conference as a good event. And 2012 is, in terms of size and in terms of number, is one of the biggest one, because at the time the Korea organized the expo. As you know, the expo has a two style. One is the regular one, but the other one is a sim-based one. And at the time they created they opened that the expo, and the main theme is the ocean, and that expo held in Yosu. So the time the most important thing, the figures which I mentioned, which I'm going to mention here, is that many the participants from the international organization like United Nations or the Tribunal and also CSS to come to Korea. And also the various peoples all around the world can find time and be with us as the 4 days the conference, together with the field trips, the Yosu Expo, and also the based to the KIOST is one of the program at the time. And this 2012, the event is, for me, it's the last event for me to directly involve as an organizer, because as I mentioned that after 2010, there is a certain issues come to me, because there are law school system adopted in Korea. So in terms of the administration, I have to work the other job at a school. And, since if you're working for the conference, you spent the many times for organizing. You have to take it to many things. So that after 2010, Hamburg meeting, I talked to the Dr. Gon of the KIOST and then Cody to take over the Korean sponsorship, because while I realized that the LOSI has a very strong tendency in terms of the marine environments and also science, I believe that it's better than to work with the single university, better than the KIOST's work as a counterpart. And Dr. Gon, he left the last night, but I have to emphasize here is that he's a person who designed a very supportive the many international program, and not only the LOSI program, but also the JVD the program, so that he should be they deserve that some recognition in that regard. And then there is a transitional period. So I involved the organizing conference with the club in 2011 and also 2012. And then the KIOST directly working with the LOSI to organize a conference. So that if you look at the program, it's the format was changed so that we come to the Berkeley to hold a conference here, and you may see that the Harry and the John Briscoe, this in the front line, as a respect as a seniority in Korean way, and we hold that the 2014 to Spain, the Madrid, the local host is Carlos, the great job. And 2015, we're back here again because we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Law of the Sea. And 2016, we hold a conference in Singapore. The local host is Bob Beckman of the Center for International Law of the National University of Singapore. The theme at the time is it's IMO instruments. Although right now the person who working on Law of the Sea is getting more familiar with the system of the IMO, but honestly speaking within myself at the time, the person who working on Law of the Sea, it is not quite familiar with the legal system of the IMO instrument. However, this at the time we organized this one, there is some doubts or some issues come up in terms of topic. However, looking at what I'm making this one is that this topic we choose quite correct, because in these days some of the issues between two corporate bodies related to the ocean, they're getting intertwine each other in some sense, and some of the issues we discussed at the time is quite useful for today's couple of the accidents and the events. And 2017, we hold a conference, the Malmo, with the local host of the Roland Long. It's a great time we had at the time. And 2018, we hold a conference at the Columbia Law School in New York. In the 2019, is before the pandemic, this is the last conference. We hold a conference in the Busan. And this conference is quite unique for me in many sense, because half of the panels go to scientists and half of the panels go to the policymakers and lawyers. I fully understand the interdisciplinary understanding approach of the ocean issues very much important, but quite difficult to actually to intertwine the two parties at the conference. And they give us some of the tasks when you're working together with the scientists and the lawyers, policymakers, the work together. And this is the brief, the historical background, and also my personal reflections of the conference I involved. And the biggest achievement is I think is a publication. Actually, for this conference, for holding the conference for Harry was one of the ideas of the publisher of the Breer, the Marie Seldan. Marie cannot find time to be with us at this time, but then when I myself have a couple of the publication, the project with the Breer, so we open time to quite communicate well. And she won hold a conference for honoring Harry at as early as possible, and so she was one of the driving force to ask us to move forward. And then the Breer is very happy about and very proud of the high quality of the publication produced by the LOSI. The first one is a different format because that came from the conference we hold in Seoul. But then after that, there are a unique cover designed by the Breer and the LOSI, which is based on the postings from the previous conference. Of course, Okay, of course, to go beyond this publication, there are a couple of publications come out. For example, ecology law quarterly of the Berkeley and Robes Institute publications, and also the IMO, the conference Singapore went to our journals of the Asia Pacific Ocean and Policy. So different concept of the publication. But I have to mention here is that the very careful the editing work or the supervising of the Harry is one of the biggest contribution for the Robes Institute, because then enhance the quality of the understanding of the ocean meta through the publication. So now this is the last slide. Now we have get here to hold that the 15th Robes conference with the Korean counterparts, and also specifically for the honoring Harry's work for the LOSI. And throughout yesterday, we have many emerging issues, and the job of the Robes Institute, as Jordan mentioned yesterday, we have to provide the emerging solutions. So that I believe that these Robes Institutes at Berkeley can or they should act more or vigorously as one of the platforms we together be with us. So I'm going to stop here. So thank you very much again. My congratulations for Harry. It's a wonderful encounter from the beginning and until today. So thank you very much. Thank you.
As my dear friend Professor Lee occasionally says to me after I presented, and he is chairing, much better than expected. Thank you so much, Seok-woo. I think we've got a little time in hand. If anyone has a burning question for Professor Lee. And I say Professor Lee because, it's only through this presentation that Seok-woo's actually revealed to me that he has any other job other than organizing conferences for our benefit. Okay, well, I'll move swiftly on, if I may, to Louise's presentation from an old friend to hopefully a new friend. And I should say that in that tour of the fantastic series of conferences, Seok-woo, I really want, as a participant in a fair number of them, the support that KIOST and Korea has had for the Law of the Sea Institute has been absolutely fantastic. And I couldn't agree with you more in terms of Harry's contribution in being able to curate with you and with partners those fantastic meetings, and his light hand as an editor, generous in understanding of delays and flexible deadlines over the years. So I very much appreciate Harry's contribution in that context. But it's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Louise Bedsworth, who is Executive Director of the Center for Law, Energy and Environment, CLE, at the University of Berkeley. University of California, Berkeley, I should say. And Louise also has a substantive experience in terms of being a practitioner, a policymaker in the government of California. I'm not going to read it all out, Louise, but please do join us at the podium, and 15 to 20 minutes, please.
I actually will be very short, and I don't have any slides, so that was a hard act to follow. Seok-woo, that was amazing. A really wonderful overview in history. So when I stepped into this role at CLE following Jordan Diamond, I knew I had enormous shoes to fill, and then this past couple days has just shown how much bigger they are than, I knew they were big, but this is really big. And so as I have stepped in and sort of helping to bring this conference together in conversation with Harry and many of you, Seok-woo and Charity and everyone who's just helped me along the way, it's been really, really thank you so much. I think a couple of things have over the last day, no surprise to everyone, is we have many urgent and pressing issues that we need to be collaborating on, having dialogue around, and really what sits a lot in our wheelhouse at CLI is sort of helping to move action forward. I will say having this roundtable discussion was also a somewhat selfish request on my part, just to become more familiar, to understand how we at CLI and at UC Berkeley broadly can be supportive in keeping this work moving forward, but hopefully growing it and sort of increasing its impact. I thought I would just share a little background on CLI, because I think we are a somewhat unique research center at a law school. We have a professional staff of about 30 and growing. And so we are working on a range of issues, some not at all relevant to what we're talking about today, others very relevant. And so we have been working recently on a strategic plan for CLI, given a pretty large growth that we have had. We have three prime pillars of our plan, one of which is facilitating international partnerships specifically to advance climate solutions, but we're working in a couple of spaces. One I mentioned already is the California-China Climate Institute, where we have a staff of 9 and growing, to facilitate collaboration between California and China and potentially other partners as well. That's a very robust partnership where we are doing in-depth research, but also a lot of dialogue and convening, as well as training to work at different levels to advance action. And we are also working on transportation decarbonization and facilitating an international partnership there. So clearly the Law of the Sea Institute and the work that is happening here fits very squarely into that strategic goal of ours, which is to be advancing international partnerships. So as we open up this roundtable, I would love to hear ideas for how we can all continue collaborating together, how CLI, but also Berkeley and Berkeley Law can be best supporting LOSI moving forward. How can we be maintaining this dialogue, organizing conferences, but are there opportunities for us to be doing more in between? Obviously, there are huge shoes to fill here. And so, as I think about this, and you mentioned the 50th anniversary in 2015, if we're looking ahead to 2025, where do we want to be at that 60th anniversary? And what roles do we all want to be playing? And how can Berkeley be best supporting that going forward? So that's really what I'm eager to sort of have a dialogue about. I think we're going to try, I'll move now to the logistics of it, which I think is we're going to try to move the camera so that everyone on the screen or on the Zoom will be able to see people in the room. And we'll pull everyone up who's on the Zoom, and we can just have some dialogue. And we will pass around microphones so everyone is able to hear.
Absolutely. Well, thank you ever so much, Louise. I was thinking that we would maybe take a 3-minute stretch of the legs, refresh coffee cups, turn the cameras around, and then sort of reconvene in multiple roundtable format. We don't just do one roundtable here, and then we can open up the floor. What I'd like to do is to invite suggestions from the floor. I know, Sherry, you were trying to say, well, you could say these 3 things, but I'm not going to do that because they're your words, Sherry, and they're good insights, and it's a really good way to initially kick us off. So rather than opening the floor immediately, I'm immediately going to go to Sherry and invite you to read out the 3 things in front of you, please.
Well, okay, these 3 things are based on what my understanding was as to what Louise was challenging us to do. And please correct me, Louise, if I'm wrong, because I tried to kind of write down what I thought you were looking for and challenging us to address. So the first thing was advancing international partnerships. How do we go about doing that? I think from my point of view, Louise's potential vision was to make LOSI even more than what it's been. And I thought seeing the publications and the different conferences Sakwu featured was really kind of inspiring. I was like, wow, LOSI's done so many fabulous things. I felt very proud. And of course, we're talking about tributes to Harry, and I think continuing LOSI would certainly be a great tribute. The second thing I thought she was talking about was having more conferences, but having also life for LOSI in between. You know, what might LOSI be doing in between? And then the third thing was the 60th anniversary in 2025 is coming up before we know it. And might there be a vision for what kind of a conference or what kind of a celebration we would have in honor of the 60th anniversary? So I'm in good shape though, because I already wrote about the 20 years in Hawaii and they haven't changed any. So hopefully I won't be assigned another chapter. But of course, Harry's not around to tell me exactly what it is I need to do and how many pages I'm going to get. And so great to work with Harry on that, because I ended up with like 60 pages and he said, that's way too long. You got to cut 20 pages out, and you have to be done in a month. Okay. But then I did all of that. But then later on, a year later, I found out he finished his chapter and his was 60 pages and a year later. So then I complained. I said, that's not fair. And he said, well, if you want to be editor, you can have as many pages as you want. So, okay. I don't know if Louise wants to comment on my comments.
Please.
No, I think that was sorry, thanks, Maya. I think that was great. I would love to, yeah. So I think, yeah, well summarized. Thank you.
Okay, very good. In a way, that comment engages with the second of the two questions we have, which is future of the Law of the Sea Institute. But if we were then to step back and to try and think about the content or the program, the themes within for the 60th anniversary meeting, then almost immediately we'd be talking about the future of the Law of the Sea. And some of the key themes that are evident from Harry's scholarship over the years, and some of the key themes that we've had meetings that the Sakwu outlined over the years. They haven't gone away. Many of them are enduring questions around science policy interface, around emerging technologies and their implications for the law of the sea, around climate change / climate emergency and implications for the law of the sea, as Vasco was talking about in terms of sea level rise implications for dispute settlement, but also in general for maritime entitlements of coastal states. So I think we by gathering that overarching look at what the Law of the Sea Institute has done over time, I think some of the key sessions actually filter through pretty readily from that experience, because those central issues have not disappeared. As David, you were saying about in the Arctic context, we've been talking for decades now about thinning and reducing sea ice and impacts of climate change on the Arctic Ocean. But as you when we tempted you into passion at the end of your one breath presentation, record beating as it was, the time is now. Well, time has passed now. We've been talking about these issues for so long, but how do you affect change? We haven't really seen that change yet, unfortunately. John, your eyebrow twitched.
My eyebrow twitched. I'm seeing a doctor about that. I've got a new meds for my twitchy eyebrow. I agree that we should be thinking about the 60th anniversary of the Institute. That's just 2 years away. I happen to brought in, if anybody cares to look at it, the 1984 conference of the Law of the Sea Institute in San Francisco, the program, it's 4.5 days long. The speakers are tremendous. I was the organizing chair for that, so I have some idea.
Thank you for volunteering.
Yeah. Well, that's part of, I am volunteering to work with whatever the committee is, but regardless of next year, I think we really ought to be thinking about 2025, and not just because it's a 6-0, one of those anniversaries with a 0 in it, but it seems to me there are going to be some major developments in the law of the sea. First of all, we will know whether the full 1,300,000 tons of radioactive waste from Fukushima is dumped by Japan into the sea and what the consequences are, and whether the politics within the ROK change such that it tries to sue either for an injunction or for damages. That may be the biggest international pollution case since the trail smelter case. I don't, it's kind of hard to say. The Iraq war damage was all done by the UN Compensation Commission, and Iraq simply acknowledged that it was responsible for it. So there was no question of liability. We have that. We have the High Seas Treaty, which may have come into force by the time of our conference. If not, it'll be pretty darn close to having come into force. We have so many other issues. There may be a war begun over Dakto. Okay, no, I'm just kidding. There may be some movement on that. I know the Dakto Institute is still alive and kicking and doing its research, so it's not an issue that's going to go away. There are a lot of issues, and some of them will be ripe, this time in 2025. They will not be ripe this time next year. Oh, the two cases before ITLOS and the ICJ on climate change. We're probably not going to have a decision, certainly in the ICJ case, by this time next year.
I think we will with ITLOS. I think we will.
With ITLOS, we might, right. Far more parties, far more cumbersome in the ICJ. So if we decide to do it, I can tell you that there was a lot of buzz about the San Francisco conference 39 years ago, partly because it was in San Francisco, and we did it at the St. Francis Hotel. Which was where 90% of the delegates to the 1945 UN conference in April and May stayed. These were all men. And when I say stayed, I use that loosely because mostly they hung out when the working sessions were not working at Sally Stanford's brothel on Pine Street. As a historic fact. And one of our columnists used to say that that's where the UN Charter was negotiated, in the parlor of Sally Stanford's place. But there's a lot of history. There's an attraction to just having it there. I'm looking at my managing partner, my boss, and we will host a dinner at Sam's Grill, as we did for the 50th anniversary. And in terms of a venue, we can always do a hotel or whatever.
Will Peter be gray by then?
Yeah, I'm. If I keep talking, if I keep vexing him, he'll be gray. But a thought I had, Peter, and you and I haven't even talked about any of this. For a meeting place, the San Francisco Historical Society has a beautiful space at 608 Commercial Street. It was the original mint in San Francisco, built during the gold rush. It's quite lovely, and it has a big ballroom area, not so cavernous that we would be lost in it, but we could have our sessions there. We could look for, a block of rooms someplace nearby at a reasonable rate. If San Francisco continues to get the bad rap that it does, the tourists will stay away, right? So that we can get some good, or we could try to lock in the rates today. But just some thoughts that we ought to start planning now for 2025.
Well said. Well said indeed. David, you were about to to launch into another breath?
Yeah, I'll speak more slowly now. So yeah, looking forward in terms of topics, we're facing a triple planetary crisis clearly, and it's clear in the UN. And so again, I think, those themes, climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution are the three main categories. And again, you can fit pretty well everything on Law of the Sea under those three categories. I would say climate change is probably the number one, issue now we're facing because it interchanges with everything else, and particularly the biodiversity loss. But just go back on ocean climate change, ocean governance and climate change. I mean, there's so much to be done even there in terms of a number of conferences that could be held. You think about mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, the components of it. You got the national comparative part of it. And then you have regional parts of this too, like, what are RFMOs doing, regional fishery management organizations with climate change and ecosystem approach, the global part of it. I mean, the Paris Agreement, how it's being implemented or not. And so again, it's a rich for all kinds of things that can be done under that. I suppose the one thing the triple planetary crisis may not capture would be more of the transboundary conflicts and cooperation. I mean, that's another huge area of law of the sea interest, right? And the whole boundary disputes and how they get resolved. And beyond that, the lack of cooperation. I mean, I think that's what really bothers me. I've done a lot of my work in US, Canada, and on the East Coast, and we just took a real deep look at it. And we have now a macro war emerging between the two countries, for example, because we don't even have a fisheries agreement on mackerel of all things after all this time. And we have they don't even have a treaty on fisheries after 1984 ocean boundary dispute resolution by a Chamber of the World Court. So there are all kinds of shifting species, cetaceans going across the border. So rich areas to be done comparative around the world. Even the blue whale, believe it or not, the US treats it as 9 different management units around the world. Canada treats the blue whale as a species that stays within its own national waters. And there's not even agreement with the largest animal on Earth where it migrates to. Whether you have a population in the North Atlantic that's 2. So anyway, there's so many rich topics. I'll stop there.
Okay, I think we're okay. Can we start planning for the 75th? Please.
Thanks. So what I was wondering, as you're saying 2025 and thinking about the crises that our planet is facing, 2025 is also the UN Ocean Conference in France. And there's, annually our ocean conference that are, the moments that international leaders are getting together to try to look towards solving some of these issues. And I guess what I wonder is, what is the role of the Law of the Sea Institute and all of this amazing scholarship and thinking, and how can it be tethered to these kinds of large scale events that are trying to drive towards, improved stewardship and management of the ocean? And is there a way, conceptually or otherwise, like if you're hosting the conference in San Francisco in 2025, can you do it out in front of the UN Ocean Conference and then try to use some of that scholarship to bring it to that conference and bring it to those leaders? Or, I'm trying to think about, and I spend, of course, my career trying to motivate decision makers to make the right decisions about the ocean, but the brain power within the Law of the Sea Institute could really lend a lot of weight to that. And I think that, of course, you are all doing it individually, but I wonder what kind of role the Law of the Sea Institute could play in that kind of movement.
Yeah, to be able to advocate collectively. We talk about cooperation. It can include ourselves, not just countries.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, Peter.
Yeah, thank you. In addition to echoing John's invitation that perhaps this be hosted in San Francisco in 2025, it occurs to me that it might be useful to invite law students, LLMs, to this event. It'd be nice to see some more younger people. We're talking about the future of the Law of the Sea Institute. It's a good place to start.
Well, to be fair, Peter, some of our early scholars are going great.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly. And Harry.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I'm glad that you mentioned that. We have had LLM students and actually JD students as well, and one or two undergraduates in the past, whom we've brought to meetings in Korea and Hawaii. So I think that is important. I was intrigued by what Catherine just said about the Ocean Summit. Isn't that what they're calling it now for 2025? The Oceans Conference, at any rate, to be held in France. And one of our sadly departed colleagues, Biljana Sisinsain, used to work through UNESCO. And actually, when I think of internationally prominent organizations, of course, UNESCO is one, where if you can get the endorsement, you can recruit a lot of talent and a lot of individuals from the world of politics and administration. And the other one that I think of is the World Maritime University, and of course now the program that Clyde and Ronan are running there. And I've been so impressed, by the way, by the wonderful programs that you put on already, shaming us here by comparison these last few years. And I should add that Ronan has kindly reached out more than once to offer collaboration with us and with the KIOST. And so I think there are possibilities here, but we need strong initiative from our side being Berkeley. At any rate, I think the idea of looking to linking in some ways at the international level, and the sort of thing that Catherine suggests is one way, getting cooperations with some of the internationally prominent organizations. I mentioned the obvious ones, UNESCO and WMU, and we know we have a welcome at WMU, kindly offered already for collaboration, but we have to have something to bring to the table in order to do that usefully. And I've thought in terms of a theme, several have been mentioned, but one, let me just throw another one into the pot to be considered. There's been comment here, I think it was at the end of Ronan's presentation, where, and then one of the other speakers mentioned it too, is the tortuously long period of time that it takes for initiatives to generate action at this form of agreements. And beyond that, there's always the problem of enforcement, and without enforcement, you don't really have a policy. And I think that actually the theme of government and enforcement would be an interesting one to take on, very sensitive and very challenging. It presents challenges both in the treaty making process and then beyond in enforcement. This was pointed out in one of the, look at the example of biodiversity treaty and its administration. There's been some progress, but look how long it's been and how difficult it's been to get it off the ground after an initial burst of interest and activity. But so I would put into the mix the idea of focusing around governance and enforcement. And when you slot in the particular subject areas, you can talk about enforcement with regard to climate change, enforcement with regard to biodiversity, pollution, trans-boundary collaboration, all the things that have been mentioned can be, you can take any number that you want and for which you can find the expertise you're looking for. And one hopes fosters some constructive ideas in those regards. And it's certainly by its universality of relevance, it's a subject that could draw in not only individuals, but it could draw in institutions, as we have in the past, and in our cooperation with other institutions, most notably, and of course, the KIOST connection. Well, I also want to say I was glad to hear the 2015 50th anniversary mentioned. That was an important time. We had a really great conference, and John, Briscoe, who's spoken about arrangements, not only masterfully helped us organize. I always went to John for organizing suggestions, and so did David. And then, of course, Jane was constantly involved very intimately with all the editing decisions and actual editing at the time. And so it's also an occasion to remember that John opened the restaurant for us on a open bar basis and put on a terrific meal for us all. So if I'm still around in 2025, my job will be to nudge him to do it again. Thank you.
Very, very good, Harry. Thank you for that contribution. I heard most prominently open bar basis. Is that good?
That would be part of the deal, definitely.
What struck me about your intervention, Harry, is, well, it's absolutely on point. I think you're absolutely right, and Ronan, I'm sure, told you yesterday in talking about BBN, the journey towards the BBNJ treaty, the length of time it actually took place in the ad hoc, informal, non-binding phases before it got anywhere near a formal interstate negotiation, and then you have the time lag between having a treaty and actually it coming into force. And we recall it took 12 years for the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea to come into force, with a year after the 60th ratification. And then we have the issue of implementation before we even get to the issue that Nick mentioned yesterday around surveillance and enforcement on the water. So yes, it does feel, I was going to say glacial, but glaciers are heading backwards these days. So maybe geological timeframes, almost, perhaps, and how we achieve that issue of effecting change in policy, which is, it's not a new issue to look at, but it's certainly not one that we've especially well fixed. So John, you coming back at me on those issues, I think there's what I was just going to observe before handing over is that it seems to me there's a very strong alignment with what Louise was talking about in relation to Berkeley's support for the Law of the Sea Institute. The alignment with CLI is the intersection of climate and ocean regimes is an element where you can see LOSI work having a strong overlap with that of CLI.
Well, there's if I may, there's an interplay there, which is an interplay of forces, which is very fascinating, because the tortuous progress of treaty making and implementation is in such stark contrast with the phenomenal speed at which technological innovation is going forward meanwhile. So issues can be identified which 10 years later have been debated and are finally congealing and being brought to the table in the form of treaties and so on. Meanwhile, the whole technology has changed. I mean, think about satellite imaging, where that was in terms of identifying in the fisheries area, for example. I remember, 40 years ago is when I started looking at these issues. And one of the big changes that occurred over the time was the fact that you can identify biomass from satellites. And that changed the whole picture with regard to organizing regulatory regimes and actions. At any rate, you've got this counterpoint of rapidly developing technology and the difficulty of law and policy to keep up with it. And I guess that's the main thing that's going on in our last couple of years with AI.
Yep.
So we have the counterpart of this in the ocean governance field. I'll keep quiet now, Clive.
Harry, I think you're again spot on. Surprise.
Is that there's a first time
This
for
has been a
everything.
theme through earlier LOSI meetings. The challenge of changing technology and emerging technology. And of course, it'll be an enduring problem for us because we tend to think in rather linear ways and deal with exponential change rather poorly in our thinking ahead. So this is going to be an enduring challenge, without doubt. And who would have thought in the last 10 years or so how we've shifted so radically away from hydrocarbons towards battery-oriented and electronic renewable technologies. And that's obviously still very much a work in progress, but it's very substantial change underway. John, you were about to come back into the conversation, and then I think Ronan would like a word. Oh, Vashka. Okay.
A couple of quick things. One, you mentioned Nick's presentation yesterday, and where's Nick? Hiding there behind Demetrius. Harry and I were talking about this. Harry gave me a call this morning as I was driving in, and he commended your presentation. And one of the things that we talked about was the great visuals. And they were simple, but the visuals helped me to understand, like Chris Carr dealt with fisheries. Chris isn't here today, so he didn't need visuals. But I do. I mean, I've dealt with fisheries issues, but it sure helps to see what's the landing, of a load of illegal fish look like. And then it occurred to me, if we deal with resources such as seabed mining, which by the way was the hot topic in the 19th, and it all started here with a book by John Merrow here at Cal.
Here we go again.
Yeah, here we go again. And he wrote a book about the riches lying on the floor of the deep seabed. And what was it? The HMS Challenger's scientific voyage in 1873 found these rocks. They're the size of, mid-sized potatoes on the ocean floor. This was the rage. This was all going to happen. One of the reasons it took 8 years to negotiate that treaty was because of all the back and forth about that. Who owns it? Are those resources the natural heritage of mankind, as Arvid Pardo said in 1967, in response to Merrow's book? Okay. And then they all went away, and now they're back big time, big issues. But what does that mining look like? I can tell you, if you can see good graphics, you need hundreds of square miles. And if you know how folks drag net for fish, this is drag netting for nodules over a much huger area. And of course, you're ripping up everything that's on the seafloor, and maybe you snag, and the nodules are not like in clumps. There's one here, there's one over there. And so to be able to see that visually would make, I'm guilty of this. I try cases, but all too often it's with words, and pictures and visual descriptions can be extremely helpful. One other quick thought, in terms of invitations, and to Catherine's point, how do we influence? We can talk to each other, but who are the people who are in a position to do so? Captains of industry, present and former members of foreign ministries of their government, captains of industry, who navigates a lot, who has to worry about pollution, oil companies. Chevron is headquartered nominally in San Francisco, it's just down the road, but get the general counsel of Chevron. You look at the 1984 conference, one of the speakers was Gordon Becker, the general counsel of Exxon. So the Law of the Sea Institute had gone out, and not only that, Gordon Becker was on the board. It had a board of directors. That's how the governance was at the time. So here's the general counsel of the largest oil company in the world at the time. One of us, a speaker. You talk about somebody in a position to influence. So we may want to think about that guest list. We'd like you to be a speaker. maybe we'd like you to contribute something to the underwriting of the conference. I got Chevron in 1984 to contribute $25,000. That was a lot of money then, you know.
So in the context of decarbonization of the economy, you're thinking of extending an invitation to Mr. Musk?
Thank you very much. Just to pick up on what Catherine did and share some of our experience. When we were brainstorming about launching the Portuguese Institute of Law of the Sea, we saw an opportunity with the hosting of the Oceans Conference in Lisbon last year. And considering what has been said so far, I would put out the following proposal, because all of this brainstorming must come to some sort of direction. Too Germanic, I'm sorry. But I would propose the following, as we did in Lisbon. Our conference, which was we have an annual conference every year, and the first annual conference was an official side event of the UN Oceans Conference that allowed us to reach out to a lot of delegations. And also this was very convenient. We didn't have a budget, and we had very dear friends. I just stretched my arm and got everybody I wanted that was in Lisbon at the time. I was writing very naive emails to people. Oh, would you be coming to Lisbon? It would be great to see you. By the way, would you speak? That was lovely. And so my proposal for 25 would be having the conference here, but also, and this comes together with what Louise and I were discussing yesterday as well, the idea that you would have an LOSI side event with partners at the conference in France in 25 as part of the anniversary, but we will have the anniversary here. Again, there was a mentioning of an open bar, as was mentioned, but then at the conference in Paris, LOSI would be, this requires planning from my experience, and Ronan can also share his experience because WMU was also involved with the very important side events during the conference, and you get everybody there. And that is not only reach out, it gives you a lot of stage, but also the chance of meeting the right stakeholders. And it's really everyone under the sun is there. So from artists and cultural activism and all that to all industry don't see so much, but I think that probably would be, it's just a proposal, but that would somehow also bring the LOSI outside of the strict academic field of these rooms and put it out there. So, and with all the scholarship that has been developed, there's a lot to show for. So thank you.
Brandon, please.
Yeah, thank you. And it's a fantastic proposals. What Catherine has said can fully endorse, and certainly I can fully endorse, and I've had the wonderful experience working in UN Oceans at Lisbon with Vasco. So I think my understanding of the proposal is that we would have a very strong event here early in the year in terms of setting it up with KIOST, of course, CLE, and the other key partners. Certainly we will come in with resources and put it on our calendar. We're actually at the right planning time now, because if we want to organize this and have a big event, it takes at least 18 months. And we have to go through our own, shall we say, procurement processes. So, but we would be willing to put our resources in and put it on the calendar. It will be a global conference, but the kind of key output is to drive forward towards what Vasco is saying, which is at a very focused side event at UN Oceans in Marseille in 2025. Now, the reason why we need to plan now is the preparatory conference for UN Oceans is going to take place in Costa Rica, and we're working very closely with their government. They're interested in all these key issues. So you need to not only bring in terms of the constituency, you need to bring in, shall we say, the champions such as Costa Rica. You need to really bring in the indigenous peoples leaders. You need to bring in those that speak for civil society,
And as John has quite rightly pointed out, you need to bring in industry partners for that global conference. I think, as John has indicated there earlier on, and we've had it from others on the floor, and indeed Harry, the substantive program self-selects. You know, everybody in this room knows here what's going to be on that program, because essentially what you want to do with the conference is to affect change. And as Catherine has said there, and to apply the intellectual knowledge that's within LOSI to a global process. And now I don't want to detract from global processes, but they're missing that. So there's a kind of a rhetoric now on this flying circus of intergovernmental UN Oceans, the Ocean Conference. Before I go to these events, I can almost anticipate what everybody's going to say in the room. But really nobody's coming up with blueprints or the kind of issues that Harry has always worked with, which is mapping out a blueprint or a strategy for taking some of these issues forward. So whether it's on the issues of compliance, oversight, intergovernmental regimes, or the big substantive issues, I think irrespective of all that, the kind of climate-ocean nexus is existential in terms of its impact. So, you know, we can hang it on that in terms of the substantive program. I think definitely CLI can be a founding partner in this, but it's KIOST and the others that we can draw upon, and certainly we will put our resources in. So very happy to support that. Thank you.
Vashka's recaptured the microphone. Sorry, Louise. But no, go. Okay, very good.
I'll just make one comment that is maybe blasphemous, so you can all ignore it, but it's just it was when Harry was talking about the speed of action. In the climate space, one thing we've worked on a lot, and it's because I've been in California, is working a lot at the subnational level and what subnationals are doing to really accelerate action in different areas. And I don't know if that's something that makes sense in this space as well, but I'm thinking specifically in sea level rise, California has done a lot and worked with other states to do that. And so that's been increasingly at the Global Climate Conference. You're seeing a lot more subnational actors in the dialogue. They're obviously not parties to the conference, you know, but they're not parties, but they are there. And so it might be another interesting angle to kind of bring in here, as well as getting more states, provinces, and regions into the dialogue.
Very good observation. Thank you.
Just to now another proposal for 24. 24, yes, 24. What we did this year with the second annual conference of the Portuguese Institute of the Law of the Sea, IPDM, was to partner with KIOST, and we had a wonderful organizing team. And Dr. Kim is here, and he and I shared more messages than during I don't know how many months, but it was really extremely successful event. And we are already planning, like Ronan has mentioned, you feel you're constantly planning, and once you finish, you take a week off, and then you're planning the next one. And we are already planning the second event, which Nick will be in Portugal next year. And one of our strategies, which is key, and I also mentioned this to Louise yesterday, is that we try to partner as much as possible, not only for scientific credibility, but and for sharing of resources, but fundamentally to give that international spectrum to it, because it's not we're not inbreeding knowledge, we're really trying to expose it to as much as we can. So if it is of interest to LOSI, and it's something for you to have a discussion internally, of course, not here. I'm not putting you against the wall, but just to be clear and transparent, that the theme for next year is precisely international adjudication, and that it's everything from fisheries to territorial disputes to tech issues, so everything, which means that there's a lot of flexibility, and it will be wonderful to have a joint annual conference next year in Portugal. Is not you did not hear me mentioning open bar, just to make that clear. There are limited resources, but we'll find something to drink for sure in Portugal. Thank you.
Well, I think this is a extremely interesting conversation, and I really like the idea of trying to have an impact. So going to the 2025 Oceans meeting in Paris would be, I think, and having a side event would be great. And maybe we could, work with others who've had side events before. Maybe we could combine with them, and the 2024 conference could be a planning session, kind of a way to check out our ideas and make a program that we would want to promote and advocate for 2025. I think I like your idea, actually, Louise, because there's the high level talking about the rules and principles and everything, but if we want action, I think showing examples of success stories is really important. And so, you have kind of a little bit of a unique knowledge of California, and Catherine's been working in the Pacific, we're looking at very specific things. When I spoke, I tried to give a very specific example of including Indigenous peoples in decision making. So I think that, I think that could play a really important part. I'm sure there's things being done in all different jurisdictions in Sweden and Portugal, Korea, that we could take a look at the 2024 conference and, pick examples. Canada. And I think in terms of doing international partnerships, I mean, you have people right now in the room who are probably more than delighted to become international partners with CLI. So I think it would be easy to reach out. We could reach out to the group that Biljana established at the University of Delaware. They're experts at side events at international conferences, and they were very much involved in, marine spatial planning and marine protected areas and things like that. So maybe we could learn from them, as to, or collaborate with them on the 2025 side event at the Oceans Conference.
Thank you, Sherry. And the world of treaty making and negotiation has moved on from the time that John was referring to, of an entirely male a bunch of negotiators in the room in downtown San Francisco, and celebrating together in the evening, to seeing Indigenous voices, seeing civil society, environmental NGOs, and that the subnational dimensions. Whilst the Westphalian states are still with us and arguably still, to a large extent, dominant in the system that we currently have, they're not the only actors and stakeholders that we have to deal with. So we need to be conscious of that, even if it makes conference organization substantially more tricky over time to be able to have representation from all those diverse voices. Sure, Sherry, go.
Allow as one vote of the United States of America. So, I think that some of these smaller nations can play a very significant role, and we should be reaching out to them because they have very high interest in climate change issues. Absolutely on that note. Catherine, please. We're allegedly on time for shifting to tributes to Harry, but I think this conversation is entirely a tribute to Harry. So please.
Awesome. Just to your point on organizing side events, we hosted an official side event at the UN Ocean Conference last year. The way that it was successful turned out to be a fairly complex endeavor, in that we ended up with.
I thought the main thing was you had to feed people.
No, turns out, no. We did do that, and we're good at, actually, my organization has been pretty successful at hosting parties, and having really high level officials like speaking at the parties. So we had the Prime Minister of Fiji and, so on and so forth. But to host that event, and I don't know how France is going to be hosting, but for the Lisbon conference, we had to partner with the UK, the UK government, the Fijian government, and there were like 6 other partners that came to the fray to negotiate. And we were focused on sustainable finance, which of course is a big issue in the context of actually managing the ocean. Who pays for it? How do you pay for it? I also really like the idea. So anyways, just to say, like, as this idea develops, I'd be happy to lend my experience and share what I've learned in hosting these kinds of events. A second thing that I wanted to say on the conversation of how to bring in some of the voices, especially small islands, since those are the groups that I work with specifically. I would be happy to help identify some of those legal experts who we work with in small island nations, some government, some outside of government, who could, I think, lend a lot of expertise and experience from that level. And I can't promise funding, but potentially could, look to our organization to support those types of voices to participate in this conference. The LOSI one, as well as the something after.
Thank you indeed. And that experience echoes, I think, some of GOI's experience through World Maritime University in terms of you need multiple partners in order to get a side event up and on the agenda. Okay, please. Sorry, talk to us.
Sure. Hi, for those of you I haven't met, my name is Sharisa. I was actually a research assistant for Law of the Sea Institute about 4 years ago, worked with Jordan Diamond. And I was lucky enough to go to the New York conference. So I see some familiar faces. I really liked what you had to say about having a blueprint and kind of looking at next steps, and also what you had to say about involving young people in the discussion. And I know after the conference in New York, some of the work that we did was distilling what people had to say and issuing a publication. And so people knew what was discussed at the conference. I don't know if that's a continuing task or not, but something that I think would be really helpful in terms of getting young people on board and basically having them see a path forward, because some of this information can be very overwhelming in a sense, is having each speaker distill their information into maybe like a couple action items or next steps. And then if there is a publication that goes out after every conference, those could be set aside as a much more accessible way for people, as young as undergrads, to have a way forward and to have kind of a hook into the work that you guys are all doing. Because I found the conference really impactful. And so having that be accessible to a wider audience, I think would be really helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. I couldn't agree more. I think it's been a very strong session of discussion of future of the law of the sea, but also of the place of LOSI within the Berkeley context, and moving forward for the next roles of LOSI in the future. And we already have some deadlines in front of us. And sorry, Brendan, please.
Yeah, just maybe, just to be a
out.
little bit clear, right? Side events, as you say, is state led. They're not south, because UN Oceans Conference is a UN intergovernmental conference. So you need partners, but look, we know where the partners are, and there have to be north-south partnerships. The key issue there is you only get about an hour and a half, so, but you can get, shall we say, the decision makers, the SGs, the big power players into the room if it's organized. Really what we need to organize is, what LOSI, KIOST, ourselves, Portugal, and the Jan van Dijk Institute are doing in the preparatory conference that John set out there. So, we have to really kind of focus in on, what date are we locking into? And then, what's at this stage, just what the thematic how we're approaching this. For example, we could say a rights-based approach to the law of the sea, and that would cover perhaps a lot of what needs to be covered. Otherwise, you know, we will have to come up with a kind of a thematic chapeau for that LOSI 60th anniversary conference. There's a lot of emphasis for the Paris UN Ocean Conference on the role of civil society. And so there's a pitch towards that now, that there's a tendency, a move away from a state-centric approach to international law. And that's reflected, by the way, in some of the multilateral instruments now. So we could reflect on that. So maybe in the next couple of weeks, everybody in this room could pitch in as to, firstly, what the thematic is, but also that we would have sufficient time between the LOSI event and the Paris, or shall we say the French event, I think it's Marseille, the French conference, which is in June. So, you know, LOSI proceedings and getting all that work done, so as we have something distilled down that we can deliver in a 1.5 hour UN Oceans event. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Clive.
Thank you, Ronan. Harry, you haven't retired from editing, have you?
Well, I'm very retired, not willingly, but being realistic.
No, I think it's reasonable to step back from herding these particular cats. Yeah.
Well, they're very nice cats. That's the good part of it. When I was chair of the faculty senate at Berkeley, people used to say, "It's unbelievable. You got through 2 years with 1,400 prima donnas and you're still going strong." I hadn't been impeached. At any rate, I'm not sure I'm on this.
You are.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Appreciate everything that's been said, and I hope, Louise, that these ideas are attractive for you, looking forward to considering all your other huge responsibilities. You've got a number of people in this room who can be of enormous help administratively, quite apart from the intellectual firepower that these conferences can attract. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. And probably this is the right sort of time frame to segue seamlessly into the session that's marked tributes to Harry. But in a way, I suspect that was a large portion of yesterday's proceedings. But
definitely I yield that time if it needs yielding. But so much was said yesterday. I can't imagine anyone else could. No matter how
but Harry, I wasn't there yesterday morning, so from a personal perspective, I'd like to just say that you've been an inspiring and profoundly multidisciplinary oceans scholar and steward, and a profound thank you from me to you for all of the opportunity and the community that's been built through the Law of the Sea Institute at Berkeley. So thank you.
Thank you. A lot of people made special efforts, but one thing that stays in my mind was your traveling all the way from Australia with was it a broken arm or shoulder? And
oh yeah.
Actually showing up, everyone's saying, "Oh, it's too bad Clive won't be able to come." And then suddenly, like Banco's ghost, you appeared, and it was to our great advantage. So it was from strong efforts from people like yourself and others in this room, you know who you are, who have contributed so much to keeping the momentum of discourse going. I always describe the LOSI Institute as one of the agencies that contributes to the international discourse. We don't have the kind of clout that a few other organizations have, like WMU, but we've gotten such terrific support over the years from Berkeley and from the university and from the Korean Institute, Ocean Science and Technology, and from other sources. And it was wonderful to hear Ronan say that the that WMU group would be behind efforts at advancing this discourse with our involvement to the advantage of our constituencies, be they the universities or other organizations, and certainly in addition to the world of policy and law, to our students. So I really thank you. And there were more tributes than I could possibly deserve yesterday, but I always say at my age, by the time the 60th comes along, it'll be my 90th year, and I already reached past the threshold where I accept all honors, whether deserved or not.
Well said, sir. Right. Well, we have lunch is on the near horizon, but if anyone else would like to make any comment at this stage, Ronan, your hand wove in my direction. But just before you say anything, I'd like to note that in Vashko's intervention, if I can quote him, "You didn't hear me say open bar." I'd say yet.
It's been fantastic being here, and I've been contacted by so many people from around the world. They were either former students of Harry or who Harry mentored or who participate in LOSI events, and many of whom have sent messages. So I'd like to read out some of the messages. I have to be quite careful there. Marie Sheldon sends a very warm regards, Harry, and wishes she was here with you.
She's wonderful and advancing the cause of publications for us. And she and I have always been on the same wavelength. And with Jane's help, I've tried to meet her standards. And she always held us to a very high standard, which was painful from time to time for certain would-be authors, but that's the way you get a series of enduring value. Thank you. Thank you, Marie, if you're by any chance connected, but I will drop her a note, of course.
And we have Professor Nilufer Oral, who's now flying at 32,000 feet between Germany and Singapore, returning where she's director at the Center of International Law. Earlier this week, she was pleading in the request for an advisory opinion in E-Class. And she has a beautiful message for you, Harry. She says, "I'm so terribly sad not to be with all of you in honoring someone who has had such a tremendous influence on my development as a law of the sea scholar and someone I admire tremendously, and that is Harry Scheiber. This tribute is perhaps overdue, but so well deserved. I remember how years ago when I knocked on Harry's door as an unknown scholar coming from Turkey, and yet instantly Harry made me feel as if I was someone who mattered, a colleague. I was so overwhelmed. He took me to the Berkeley Faculty Club and I was absolutely thrilled. And then he invited me to the workshop in 2009 and conference when I was at that time at George Washington University. For me, it was the biggest honor to have been invited by Professor Harry Scheiber to the Law of the Sea Institute conference. And I have to say that it was the beginning of a wonderful and special relationship as scholars and friends, and not just with Harry, but also the wonderful, brilliant, and beautiful Jane. I learned so much from Harry working on books with him and organizing conferences. I also met such wonderful friends who I think as the Law of the Sea Institute family. One of my absolutely, if I can get to it, favorite photos is the Law of the Sea Institute family photo taken at the Claremont Hotel. Dare I add, that was the one with the terrible carpet. That photograph wins the carpet prize. Nilufer continues, it was the warmth of the Harry and Jane, and also our very dear friend, the late David Carn, who made LOSI extraordinary in a very special place. Likewise, in relation to the late Jan van Dijk. Thank you, Harry, for your mentorship and friendship. And thank you for your invaluable contribution to Law of the Sea scholarship. Thank you for inspiring and mentoring so many scholars. I'm sorry I've written this flying midair from Hamburg to Singapore. Thank you so much, Harry. And I really wished to be with you over the last number of days, Professor Nilofer Oral. So beautiful message, Harry.
Very wonderful. Thank you, Nil, for so much.
One more, and Maria Gavinelli, a wonderful colleague. I think she's in that photograph, Sekeli, that she showed at the top of the table. Was sitting beside Dan Badansky this morning in the Claremont Hotel, that 50th anniversary conference. Maria says, some years ago, I've spent a semester at Berkeley as a Fulbright scholar. Harry was quite unwell at the time, but even over the form, the warmth of his welcome and the aura of his presence was evident. Even though he was physically absent when I arrived, he was still the very soul of a community of scholars, friends, and colleagues whose love of international law in all its manifestations was simply omnipresent. His influence, his memory, his legacy is still felt amongst all of us. Those of you who are lucky enough to be present in the room, and those of us who joined from far away, share many cherished memories. May his blessings be eternal. From Istanbul, Maria.
Oh, that's a beautiful sentiment. She's a lovely person, and I did have the opportunity to meet her, and it was a pleasure. And in reading her work on the Mediterranean and other subjects I've learned a great deal from her. And so thank you very much, Maria. It means a great deal.
And David Freestone and indeed all our colleagues who are in E-Class at Hamburg. I think this is Bashka may correct me. I think is there 35 states intervening and 4 intergovernmental organizations. More or less everybody in the Law of the Sea community that's not here in this room is in Hamburg. So look, David says all of your friends and colleagues send their very special warm tributes to you today, and to honor this extraordinary scholarship that you have delivered on. And indeed, he looks forward to the next meeting of the Law of the Sea Institute and conference with KIOST and other colleagues worldwide. So warmest regards and best wishes. David Freestone and other colleagues at E-Class. Thank you.
Fabulous.
David has been a wonderful contributor to, of course, the Law of the Sea studies, and he edits one of the major journals in international law, not just of Law of the Sea. David and David Karen used to have a little fun joshing over the claim to who was the first to introduce climate change to university curriculum. David wrote a paper, of course, 1979, a famous paper, which you must use as the cornerstone of the studies of boundary issues and climate change and the shifting boundaries. No, very amazing paper in terms of outlining all the issues to come, and I mean all of them. I'd like to see someone name one issue that he didn't at least suggest, with his great knowledge of not only the law but of the oceans and the science that was required. And he introduced at the university, not just at the law school, but the university level, a climate change. It was then called climate. What was it? Climate warming was what it was called at the time, at the very beginning of worldwide attention to this, as a field in which courses could be given. I guess Catherine and Jordan were here then as students, but it was even before that, perhaps. So David, at that time, we believed that that was the first such effort in any university. And when David Freestone heard about it, they said, "Oh, no, I did that about a year before David did." And so I think we finally settled it. David, I think we settled it privately by saying, well, there is the time zone between between London and Berkeley, so give it. Anyway, both of those gentlemen played a huge role in opening up that question and bringing it to the university curricular level and research collaboration level. And of course, both of them were pioneers in other areas, international law as well. Yeah, but I thought we should give credit where it's due. Thank you, David, for your, I hope I didn't aggravate David by bringing that sensitive subject up again. Okay, thank you.
Hi, Harry. This is Hernando Frade. Just to greet you and to tell you how honored I've been just to be invited by you to stay at the LOSI Institute in 2013, 2014. Just be quick, just to say you how your inspiration, your help has changed my life for really, really best. And so just to thank you and all the people of the LOSI, because your help has been a game changer, a big game changer. And also I'm gonna be quick and I'm gonna pass the mic to Sherry, brother. Yesterday I sent a quick message to Tulio Treves, just saying your very beautiful words about him, and he was really, really honored. And he sends a big hug, but I mean Sherry shall have many more things to say about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Harry, I'm just going to read Tulio's message. Dear Harry, dear friends and colleagues, I am very sorry not to once again be in Berkeley discussing law of the sea issues around Harry. Unfortunately, this time I could not make it, to my immense regret. Please consider me present in honoring Harry and in continuing to be a friend of the law of the sea community. With warmest regards, Tulio Treves.
Fabulous. Thank you, Sherry. And I think David has half a breath to add. So we've got about now.
I missed that.
David.
Here, as one of the persons yesterday, I didn't have time to give you any kind of tribute. I want to, again, thank you going way back. You were one of the key persons around who cared about U.S.-Canada relations, for example, kind of the neglected field of ocean governance, I think, research. And you actually had me over to your house at one point as well, like many other people here. But, you know, there's a question been swarming around here the last couple of days. What's Harry's connection to Canada? And my memory's kind of lost me, but someone said you were Canadian, and you obviously have a Canada interest. So forgive me. And even John Briscoe, I don't think had the answer to this, which I was surprised.
That was a matter of careless editing by Wikipedia. They moved me across the border from New York State for the purposes of giving me a place of birth. And so that was a mistake. And when I told one of my grandchildren yesterday, grown children, about it, he immediately got on and changed it back and tried to. I told him that wasn't a good idea, because Tony Mendocino has been planning for a long time to write up a Wikipedia biography for me.
Harry, you're the
I
only
didn't want
person
them to fool around with it now, because when she finally submitted it, they probably wouldn't accept it. But anyway, my immortality will have to rest on other foundations, but one of them can't be.
Harry,
However, I would like to say that one of the things that I regard myself as one of the best things I've ever done, if I may say so, was a long piece on Canada, the US, and Japan. It was and the form and the history of the 1953 Treaty on International Fisheries Management Treaty, which was kind of for me the culmination of my work in the archives of Canada. And well, it was a culmination of my work in Canadian archives, US archives, British archives, Japanese archives, with the help of a translator. And it's a long piece. It's really a monograph, and it was published as one of our Law of the Sea projects. I can't remember the exact year, but it was, if you read it, I hope people will read it, because as I say, I've been hoping to incorporate that into a book that I've got about 90% done, and I just haven't been able to get the energy to finish it. But that's another story. I'm working on it, but I put a lot into that long piece. And part of my determination to get that done, and I called it the North Pacific Triangle, was because J. Bartlett Brebner, great Canadian-born scholar, professor at Columbia, had been my professor in a course in Canadian history. He's the author of a landmark publication called North Atlantic Triangle on US, Canada, and Britain and their relationships, cultural, political, economic. He's a great, really great scholar. He gave up his citizenship to become an American citizen, but he had been in the Canadian artillery unit during World War I, on the British, in the Commonwealth British Army Empire at that time, Army. He came to Columbia after working with the great Harold Adams Innes, and Innes's great book on the cod fisheries was mandatory reading under Professor Brebner. I was his honors student in an honors undergraduate thesis course, which I did in Canadian history. And he was very much also an economic historian, so very inspiring to me. One of several professors who gave me incredible amounts of attention and help, and after whom I've tried to model my own career as a teacher. At any rate, that's my connection with Canada, David.
You are an honorary Canadian for sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me just say one other thing, Harry. I did a Google search, and some kind of site you could go on to check for people. I put Harry Scheiber Canadian, and you have a very clean record. There's no criminal record. There's no major unsecured debts. There is a website. So you actually came out very clean, Harry. Thank you.
Oh, good.
Thank you, David. Harry, I'm just so delighted to learn that you yourself have been a subject of an international boundary dispute. Very fitting. Please do. Any more comments from the floor? I think, yeah, the word that I've heard repeatedly is inspiration, and I'm not going to use the past tense here. You continue to be an inspiration, Harry. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you, everyone. And I should end with, thank you all. And we'll be in touch. I'm not good at correspondence, but we'll be in touch. And my parting words to you for just a moment is bon appetit. Okay.
Thank you ever so much, and we really appreciate those words, even though we were clapping over the top of them. And we will be raising a glass to your health.
Good. Bon appetit, and have a safe trip home, those of you who have traveled far. And it's so good to see, even virtually, and to hear you speak in this forum. Those of you who've come so far. Thank you very much, all of you.
Bye.
And okay. Thank you. And
Should we get up?
I see. No, I just want to leave it on.
Okay, it's on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
No, you're
Oh,
on mute. No,
I just had a personal wave from Ronan. I just want to say, extend my best to Margaret. We used to speak of you too often. Yeah. Well, all right. Have a good day. Thank you so much, everyone. Just cut me out.
You done?
Mm-hmm.